And can somebody tell me their answer for B? If you're not volunteering, I will volunteer you. Connor? T equals 3. Anyone need me to show the work for those? Just raise your hand. Anyone want me to show A? Anyone want me to show B? Okay, good. You should be able to do these. These are Algebra 1 / pre-algebra. All right, now example 2, A and B, we're going to skip over those and come back to them at the end of class because there's not a lot of these on your homework. The majority of the homework is the other problems. So I'd rather get to those and then we'll come back to these at the end, or we can touch upon them tomorrow if we need to. So we'll skip over those 2 problems. I believe these directions are at the bottom of your page and then you have to flip, but we'll fill these out. So to solve an equation for a given variable, we're going to use inverse operations, just like we have been. The only difference today is they're going to ask us to state any restrictions on the variables. Like my shirt's touching the board, so it's... And this is the part that a lot of you will struggle with. What does a restriction mean? You're restricting something. Stopping. What else? Like if your parents are restricting you from going to the movies. You know, they're preventing you. They're stopping you. They're not allowing you to do something. When there's a restriction on the variable, you're telling me that the variable can't be a certain number. Okay? It doesn't exist. It would be undefined. The only restriction you're going to have to worry about right now is your denominators. What number is not allowed to be in the denominator of a fraction? Aiden?
Variables?
No. What number is not permitted to be in the denominator? Like 2 over what would be undefined? Mira? 0. Okay? So the denominator, the bottom of a fraction, can't be 0. So any variable that you have in the denominator, you have to tell me that it can't be 0. Okay? Because if it were 0, the function doesn't exist because it would have a hole in the graph because that's an undefined function. All right, solve for x. Find any restrictions on A or B. So we're solving for x. So again, you might want to highlight or circle that. We're going to use inverse operations. You actually already solved equations like this on your homework last night. What would I do first? To both sides. Go on. Multiply by 8? What's the inverse of adding 8? Oh, multiply by A. Now, if you do that, you're going to have to distribute it and get it to the 8 also. I would suggest doing that second. Think about this regular equation, right? Wouldn't you undo addition first instead of, like you could divide by 2, but then you'd have to divide this by 2. So it's more helpful if you undo addition or subtraction first. It's doable, but you'd have to distribute. So we'll undo addition with subtraction, 8. Now on the right-hand side, we now have a binomial, something being added or subtracted. You probably want to group it with parentheses either now or in the next step because you will have to remember that that is a grouping of terms. Now we'll do a coincide, which is to multiply both sides by A, undo division with multiplication, and that's our final answer. You can either leave the A out front, or if you prefer, you could distribute it. I don't care which of those you put as your final answer. Now, we do have to state any restrictions. Remember, the only restriction is if the variable would be in the denominator. Okay, well, we have no fractions on our final answer, right? So most students would think no restrictions, but you do have to always check the original. Is there a denominator that is a variable in the original? Well, yes, A. So our restriction is that the variable A could be any number in the world except 0. So you'll put A, an equal sign with a slash through it, which means cannot equal 0. if a were to equal 0, you would get x divided by 0, which is undefined. Remember in your calculator, if you type it in, it gives you like a divide by 0 error. All right, now, the next one. What looks different about this one than the first one? Aiden?
We have to solve for both a and b.
No, we're solving for x still.
A and b are on both sides. Like you're on the same, or rather on the same side.
They're on the same side. What do we notice about Parker?
Z is a product.
Say again?
The Z is a product.
No. We're solving this for x. How is this one different than this one?
There's a 0 on it?
There's a 0 on the, I'm not talking about just the x's. Comparing this to this. Not the numbers or the, what's different?
You multiply them instead of dividing.
You're multiplying a and x instead of dividing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. The other one was x divided by a. This one's a times x. I see that, Amira?
X is multiplied by a.
Yeah, you have two of them. Like you have two x's, and the final answer you want to have x equals just one x. Okay? So whenever you see two of the variable that you want to solve for, this is an indication that you're going to need to factor. Okay? Not necessarily in your first step, but you're going to have to factor out a greatest common factor of x. Now right now, 15 does not have an x on it, so I can't factor out an x. So what I'll do first is I will move the 15 over using inverse operations. So I'll add 15 to both sides. So I have ax plus bx equals, and 0 plus 15 is just 15. Okay, so now I have an x with each term. That's a common factor, right, between each term. So we are going to factor out an x. When you factor out, remember, you're basically dividing, you're undistributing. Distributing is multiplying, so you're undistributing. So we'd be left with a plus b. And always double check it in your head. If you were to redistribute this, x times a is ax, x times b is bx equals 15. Those are equivalent. Now we can solve for x by doing what to both sides? If you do not want to distribute, you will undo what you just did. What do I need to do to isolate my x? I'm going to leave this where it's at, and I'm going to move this over. Savannah? No. Parker? Divide. Right now, x is being multiplied by a plus b. The inverse of multiplying is dividing. And you will want to keep them grouped. So our final answer is x equals 15 divided by the quantity a plus b. All right, now restrictions. The restriction, again, is that the denominator cannot equal 0. So denom cannot equal 0. Well, the denominator in this case is a quantity. So the restriction will be the denominator, a plus b, cannot equal 0. Now, usually when there's two letters, they'll take it a step further. They'll actually solve for 1, so move the b over. So subtract b on both sides. And you'll get that a cannot equal negative b. This is our restriction. Basically, they can't be, one is a number and the other is the opposite. So it can't be like 2 and negative 2, 3 and negative 3, 4 and negative 4. Because those would make 0 when you plug them in. So it's just saying they can't be opposites of one another, is your restriction. All right, example C, what would I do first here? Maybe someone I haven't heard from. Again, we're still solving for x. Bailey?
Subtract b.
Good, subtract b. Oops, I'm still in highlighter mode. So we have d minus b equals 2x divided by a. Sorry, that might not be the best color for me.
Group them?
Yes, very good. Aiden said, would we group them? Yes, this is a binomial. Two things being added or subtracted. They need grouping. Excellent. What's the next thing we would do? Aiden? Multiply by A. Good. And so at that point, add the parentheses if you didn't already. And you can distribute or you can leave the 2 up front. Doesn't really matter. Oh, sorry, I put a 2 instead of an A. But easier just to erase that. And you can distribute the A or you can leave it up front. I don't really care. And then you guys all know the last step will be to divide by 2. All right, now our restrictions. Okay, you do not have to say 2 cannot equal 0. That's obvious. 2 is not 0. So if it's a number, it doesn't matter. But before we say no restrictions, which is an option, we do need to check that top part and see if we have a denominator up there. And we do. The denominator was a variable a. So we will say that a can't be 0. If it's 0, it's undefined. All right, last one. Solving for x again. What would I do first? Aiden?
Subtract b.
Good, subtract b. Undo addition or subtraction first. Again, notice that we now have a binomial on the right-hand side, so I would group those, just to remind myself to distribute if I do anything else. Next step. Aiden? Multiply by b. Good. This is grouped as well. So this is being divided by b. The inverse is to multiply by b. And you could distribute the b or leave it out front. It's up to you. But you do need parentheses. And now, our last step will be to solve for x. John?
Subtract a.
Subtract a. Now, when you subtract a, you do want to subtract it at the end, not like inside the parentheses.
So that you did x equals b parentheses a minus b parentheses minus
You got it. Now, the other way you could do it is distributing. If you distribute this, you'll get ab minus b squared minus a. Those are the same thing. I don't care which one you got. Now, for our restrictions, what would our restriction be? Come on.
B cannot equal 0.
Perfect. No denominators down here, so if you think no restrictions, but check up here, and yes, we would say b cannot equal 0. Very nice. All right, we have a real world problem, which you guys probably already know how to solve these, but we'll do you want to do example 2 or example 3? They're both the same thing, fencing. What do we think? We'll do one. You pick. Oh, you only have one of them. I'm sorry. Do you not have both? No, you only have one. 3 more than twice. I'm sorry. On my notes, I had 2 of them. My apologies. I must have cut one out because I have been cutting it out of my notes. So you don't have it on yours. All right, so this one says a rectangle's length is 3 more than twice its width. The perimeter is 48. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and we're going to define a variable to represent the length and width, and also use algebra to represent an expression that we can set equal to 48. So what would I label the sides of my rectangle? Aiden?
Length would be L and width would be W.
Then you would have 2 variables and not be able to solve it. But yes, you are right. Length is usually L and W is our width. But they do tell us that the length is 3 more than twice its width. So what expression would be 3 more than twice a variable? Let's let W be the width. Okay, so let's define the variable. Come on.
2 times W plus 3.
Good. 2 times W plus 3. 3 more than. And then we would just let our width be width. So this is also 2W plus 3. This is also just W. You could use X, doesn't matter, you just need a variable. And then for perimeter, you can either add up all of the sides, or you can use the formula for perimeter of a rectangle if you prefer. Just 2L plus 2W. But you also could just add up all the sides. It doesn't matter to me which one you use. If you use the formula, you do need to distribute. And then plus 2W is just 2W. And then we just solve that. Oh, set it equal to 48. And solve. So go ahead and solve for W. See what we get. And then also plug it back in and figure out what the length is. So once you get what W is, plug it back into our expression for length so that we have the whole dimension. And tell me what they got for the length after we plug that back in. Aiden?
I got 17.
Very good. And then we probably want to tack on units. They said centimeters, so this will be centimeters and centimeters. All right, the next one kind of looks familiar for those of you that took geometry last year. We have a quadrilateral, and it tells us that the side lengths are in a ratio, which is a comparison of two things by a fraction, of 2 to 3 to 4 to 6. The perimeter is 150. So when it says the ratio is in this format, it could be 20, 30, 40, and 60. Or if we multiplied each of these by 5, we could get 10, 15, 20, and 30. So the numbers, if you were to reduce all of them to simplest form, is like 2, 3, 4, and 6. So because we don't know what that constant that we're multiplying by is, you just want to add a variable. So this would be 2x, 3x, 4x, and 6x. All of them are going to be multiplied by a constant number to find out what their side lengths are. And we know that the perimeter is 150. So all we have to do is add these up. And set it equal to 150. Combine all our like terms. These are all like terms. So this is 5x plus 10x, which is 15x. Now make sure you don't think x is 10 as your final answer. They actually want to know finding the lengths of the sides. So you need to take that and plug it back into each of the sides. So the side lengths would be 20, 30, 40, and 60. And those are all centimeters. Then our last few problems are talking about consecutive integers. You should remember these problems from Algebra 1, perhaps. Consecutive integers are things that go in order. So like 1, 2, 3, 4 are consecutive. They are numbers that differ, or integers I should say, that differ by 1. So they can be positive or negative. We won't have any fractions or decimals, but they will differ by 1. So for example, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are consecutive integers. We also could have negative 10, negative 9, negative 8. Now, consecutive even integers, for example, would be 2, 4, 6, 8. Those are integers that differ by how much? 2. Good. Integers that differ by 2 are even. Now, odd. Odd integers, for example, would be 1, 3, 5, 7. Those are integers that differ by how much? 2 also, right? 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7. So these are actually the same. The only thing that differentiates them is the starting number. If the starting number is even and you add 2, you get an even number. If its starting number is odd, you add 2, you get an odd number. Now, some of these you could just guess and check, especially if you had a calculator. You could just play around until you figure out what 3 numbers there are. But sometimes the problems will get more difficult, so I'm going to teach you strategies to use algebra. So it says the sum of 3 consecutive integers is 147. So it's saying when you add 3 numbers that are consecutive, you get 147. Now to do this with algebra, we're actually going to define variables to represent each of the numbers. We have our first number, our second number, and our third number. The first number for all problems will be x. Now, if they're consecutive, what expression would I use to represent the second number? They're just consecutive, not odd or even, just consecutive. Peyton?
X plus 1.
Good, x plus 1. And the third will be 1 greater than that, so x plus 1, which will be x plus 2. And then we take and we plug those into our expression. Now, if you want to group these, you could, but you don't need to because nothing's getting multiplied by them. And then you just solve combining your like terms. Subtract and divide. You might need to do division off to the side since we don't have a calculator. And then they do want to know what are the three numbers. So once you get your answer, then just add 1 and add 2 to find your other numbers. All right, Matthew, what'd you get?
48, 49, 50.
You got it. 3x equals 144. Divide 3 into 144, and we do get 48. To get the other numbers, you just have one more and one more than that. And you can always check that by adding those back to make sure you get 147. All right, last one is a consecutive odd integers add to 141. So this is 3 numbers. Now they could tell you 4 numbers, just so you realize they can get crazy and say whatever they want. They could also have like 4 consecutive numbers, but the sum of the second and the fourth equals something. The process is still going to be the same in the way you define your variables. So we have 3 numbers, and they're consecutive odd. The first one will always just be plain x, no matter what problem you're doing. What will the second one be represented with an algebraic expression? Savannah? X plus what? 2. Because they're odd. Remember, 3, 5, 7, 9. If it said even, you would do the same thing, x plus 2, x plus so on. But if it just said consecutive and we didn't see the word odd, it would be x plus 1. Now, this one will be 2 more than the previous, which would make it x plus 4. Now, some students are like, Mrs. Bennett, you're out of your mind. These are even numbers, and it says odd, like 2, 4, 6. That's not mattering. The first number is odd, like 7. 7 plus 2 would get you 9, which is also odd. So these numbers are not going to be odd. The final answer will be odd. So x plus 2, and x plus 4. Collect all your like terms. And solve. While you guys are doing that, I'm going to pass out your homework. Accident put 45, 46, 47. So always make sure you go back and reread the question. All right, excellent. Now let's flip back in our notes to the first 2 examples, which are more like what we were working on the past few days. They are geometry with formulas, different letters. We won't have any restrictions on the variables because h is the height, b1 and b2 are the lengths, so the lengths will never be negative. Like they're never going to get us a negative answer because they're distances. So this one asks us, this is the area of a trapezoid in case you forgot. We're asked to solve for b1, which is inside of the parentheses. What do you think we would need to do first? I have a couple of options. Eden?
Multiply by 2.
Good, let's get rid of that 1/2 that's hanging out there. Let's multiply by the reciprocal, which is 2 over 1, technically. So we'll get 2a equals h times b1 plus b2. All right, now what? and we're solving this for, what did I say, B1. Always kind of draw attention to it so that you know what's staying, what's gone. You have two options, I guess. Peyton? That's what I would do. You can distribute H. It will just make you have a few more steps in your problem. I would undo multiplication right now with division, personally. And I can drop off my parentheses at that point because I no longer have anything outside of them. And then we are solving for B1, so the last thing we have to do to both sides. Done? Subtract B2. So our final answer will be that B1, and I usually use the symmetric property. Remember that from geometry where you can just switch stuff around, so I'll put B1 on the left. So B1 equals 2a over h, and then minus B2. You cannot put this in the numerator because it doesn't have a common denominator. So it was 2a over h, and then I subtracted B2. I would accept this answer. Now, if it were on a multiple choice, or if you're checking your answers on my key, this answer might not be there. So what they may have done is they actually might make this have a common denominator by multiplying by h. And so they would have B1 equals 2a minus h times B2 all over h.
Why?
I don't know. Just so it's one expression instead of two. But I don't care. If it's an open-ended question, leave it like this, I'm fine with it. But if you check your answer online, just realize that this might be the way they show it. They like to have one term instead of having multiple terms. All right, we're not going to get to the last one, and that's okay. But you can try the closure question that was at the end of the notes, which is a ratio question.